So is Labor trying to walk away from its commitment to mandatory pre-commitment technology, or is it at the very least trying to water down the impact of this technology? Well, the Greens and the other independent senator, Nick Xenophon, argue instead the government should go with $1 bet limits. This was Andrew Wilkie's original idea. Instead of the complication, the complexity of having to register and then have a licence to punt, as it's called, with mandatory pre-commitment technology, a simpler, easier way would be just limit all poker machine gambling to a $1 maximum spin. The industry doesn't like that either, but it might be an easier sell. Does the Coalition think this is any better than mandatory pre-commitment technology, something it has vowed to repeal should it win government? I spoke a little earlier to the Shadow Minister for Families and the opposition spokesman on this issue, Kevin Andrews. Kevin Andrews, the Productivity Commission was the one that originally suggested this idea of requiring punters to nominate how much they're willing to bet. What is the Coalition's main problem with this idea of mandatory pre-commitment technology?
Simply that it won't work, David. If the gambler, the individual, can nominate a limit, firstly they can nominate any limit. It could be totally exorbitant compared to their income or their wealth. But secondly, if they reach that limit and they're addicted to gambling, they can come back the next day or the day after and set an even higher limit. So it won't work in terms of the first question that has to be asked about any policy proposal, and that is, will it work? If it won't work, it's not good policy. But
why then are the clubs and pubs screaming about revenue losses? If it's not going to make any difference to problem gamblers and gambling losses, why is the industry so worried about revenue losses?
Well, they're concerned about the second issue, and that is what are the consequences of the change. And even though it won't work in any overall sense, nonetheless, they estimate that it would have adverse consequences in terms of the cost of them actually making all the changes, and secondly, the hassle that people would face in terms of just, going out to dinner one night and wanting to have a few bets. That seems to be an enormous cost compared to the minority of people who are problem gamblers, and we say there's a better way to tackle that through education and counselling, as you would with any other addiction.
Well, this issue of your average punter, not a problem gambler, but someone who wants to have a flutter after a dinner, as you say. The other idea that's out there that Andrew Wilkie originally suggested, the Greens support, a $1 maximum bet limit. So no need to have a licence to punt, as it's called. It's simply a $1 limit on all poker machine bets, $1 spin. What does the Coalition think of that plan?
Well, we're looking at all of these matters at the moment, and I won't preempt the policy outcome, David. We expect to provide a report to the Leader of the Opposition by the end of February, as was asked of me and the task force. But there are problems that have been raised in relation to that as well. If people end up just sitting in front of a poker machine for hours upon hours beyond what they normally would to expend similar amounts of money, then that's not going to solve the problem either. So any of these proposals will ask the two fundamental questions. Firstly, will it work, and what are the consequences? And I think the problem with what we've got now is that this is all the result of a political deal, largely between Andrew Wilkie and Julia Gillard to make her Prime Minister. It wasn't well thought through in the first place.
But by the sounds of that, you haven't ruled out supporting a $1 maximum bet limit.
Well, as I said, I'm not going to preempt our policy announcements, but I will say this: it has to address those issues. If it won't work, then we will not be inclined to support it, and if it has significant adverse consequences, then we won't be inclined to support it either. So I'm talking to various players about it.
Would you also, with $1 bet limits, if the government were to go down this path, and it's still an if, would you pledge to repeal that as you have with mandatory pre-commitment technology? You've said the Coalition in government would scrap the whole thing. Would you do the same thing with $1 bet limits?
Well, I'm not preempting our policy decision and an announcement of it, so I can't preempt anything that flows from it, such as that question, David. We're going through a proper process. The difference between us and the government is we didn't just sign up to a deal to make Julia Gillard Prime Minister. We're going through a proper policy process. When we get to the end of that process, we'll be in a position to make a full announcement.
Fair enough. Can I ask you, while I've got you there just finally, about this argument that we've seen within the coalition in recent weeks over the so-called welfare state industry support issue. We've had people like Barnaby Joyce saying we should continue support for the car industry in particular. Others like Joe Hockey drawing a line in the sand, apparently, saying that the coalition should keep its policy of slashing $500 million in industry support for the car industry. Where do you stand on this one?
Well, David, again, I'm not going to preempt the policy announcement. Sophie Mirabella is leading a policy process, and when that group reports back to the policy committee and to the shadow cabinet, we'll then be able to have a full discussion and come to a decision. So,
but do you have a personal view on this? Do you have a personal view on support for the car industry?
Trouble with expressing a personal view about this is it'll be taken as one way or the other. I think my advice to myself and to all my colleagues is let's go through the policy process in a proper way.
Fair enough. Kevin Andrews, the Shadow Minister for Families, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure, David.